Thanks for coming. Great to see so many faces here. As Olivia said, I'm Kate from Waimea Nurseries. We're based in Nelson. We are fruit tree specialists. We supply fruit trees to garden retailers all across New Zealand. From our base in Nelson, we supply to retailers down to in Invercargill all the way up to Kaikoui is our furthest north store. And of course to Oderings here in Christchurch and also to their stores in the North Island. So really pleased to be here. A bit about Waimea. We are based in Nelson. We cover about 200 hectares of nursery. We have about 200 staff at the moment. It's one of our peak times in the nursery. It's a family business. It's been operating for almost 50 years, and one of my jobs over the next 6 months is organising our 50th anniversary celebration, so that's really exciting to be part of. I've been at the nursery for 15 years since I graduated from uni. I don't have any horticultural qualification. Everything I've learned has been on the job with all the amazing people that I work with. They're all horticulturally qualified and are really great, generous people with their time and expertise, and I've learnt a lot about how we grow plants in the nursery, but then also all of the care and making sure that they grow really well in people's home gardens as well. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to talk today about, as you will know probably, I'm going to talk today about pruning of deciduous trees, of newly planted trees, and I can give some tips on what to do with more established trees as well. I will talk about espalier training, and I'll talk about care of your fruit trees in terms of nutrition and pest and disease prevention. Totally happy to answer questions as we go, and as Olivia said, I've got to leave at 3 to get to my flight, so depending on how we go, I should probably have time. I'm sure we'll have time at the end to have questions, just one-on-one at the end as well. So, is there anything outside of what I've said I'm talking about that people are wanting to know about? Pretty much cover everything? Cool. Okay, great. So what I'll start off talking about is pruning apple trees, in particular, pip fruit, so apples, pears, nashies into a central leader tree. And I've got an example of a young tree here. Can everyone see that? Is that okay? It's not quite as good a specimen as the one I had this morning, unfortunately. It's fine. The idea with a central leader tree for apples and pears for pip fruit is that you have a tier of branches at around this sort of height, and then a gap, and another tier of branches at around this sort of height. And the idea is that those tiers of branches, the upper tiers don't shade the lower ones, so you need to have a decent gap in between. And I keep doing this because the idea is that the branches are more horizontal, because one of the things with fruit trees is that the more horizontal the branches, and this is especially with stone fruit, pip fruit, but all really, is that the more horizontal the branches are, the less vigorous they are with vegetative growth and the more productive they are with fruiting growth. So if they're going up like this, they're growing up to the sky. And pears in particular just want to go up like this. But while these branches are young, it's a really good idea to prune them down or train them down and to be more horizontal. You probably wouldn't do that with a short branch like this, because what happens when you take this to horizontal is that it really slows down the sap flow, and the sap flow is the energy source. So if the sap flow is really slow, it'll produce all this fruit, but it won't produce much growth out the end. So if you've only got a short branch like that one, it's not going to grow very much. So it's a balance between allowing it to grow, but not waiting until it's so solid, like this one here probably only has another 6 months more worth of growth before that would be too rigid to actually bend down. You can put a stake in the ground and tie these branches down, to use as a base to string them down, or you can it looks a bit hideous, but if you get some plastic bottles and tie them onto the branches and put a little bit of water in it and then hang it down, and eventually that'll strengthen up, it's called lignify, and that will just stay in that form, in that more horizontal situation.
Can you do that with an older tree or anything younger?
You tend to do it with a younger tree, but mainly because the older tree wouldn't be as pliable like this. Yeah. So for this tree, one of the things with planting fruit trees is that it's a really good idea to spend the first couple of years just getting the tree's structure sorted out so that it's growing branches in the right places and not putting energy into lots of branches. Like all of these are kind of wasted growth and what is an ideal central leader tree. So what we'd really want is a set of branches around here and then a gap, so getting rid of all of them, and another set of branches around here. So it's rather than planting it and leaving it and letting these get big and then in 4 years' time thinking, oh my goodness, I really should get round to pruning my fruit trees, and then you've got to make really big pruning cuts on these, and which is then a risk of pest, or not so much pest, but disease infection into trees, is those pruning wounds. This tree has put so much energy into growing them, and then to take them off, it just seems like a waste. Whereas if you get the pruning done straight away as soon as you plant it or in the first year, then the tree is putting its energy into the right places and good branch development and good root development, and that will help sustain a really good crop when the trees get older. So this one's a wee bit tricky, I must admit, this particular tree, because it's got two really dominant branches on this side, weaker branches on this side and weaker branches on this side. So it's a bit of a curly one, but this is it's real life, so it's never going to get a perfect tree. Well, not never, but sometimes you're not going to get a perfect tree. What I'd be a little bit concerned about is that these branches are so strong and dominant, is that if I say select, so when you're selecting the tier of branches, you want them to be evenly spaced around the tree so they're not going to shade each other or cross over. So, you kind of think north, south, east, west sort of thing, but so, for example, I wouldn't want to keep those two branches because they're immediately above and below each other, so this branch would end up shading this bigger one, the lower one. So you wouldn't want to keep both of them. These two are just so dominant. I probably would like to take those off and maybe choose some of these branches here to be my first tier. Even though they're smaller, it's a lot more even. What will happen is if I left those on and tried to leave these as the branches on the other side, these ones are just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger at the expense of these ones. So I think what I'll do is give it quite a chop. So just remove some of these. So I have that one on that side, this one here, this small one, this one on this side. I'm just going to shorten it so it's a more even length, so it's not going to be it's quite drastic, really. So I've got a cluster. You can see I've got a cluster of quite evenly spaced branches around the trunk. This one, I'm going to take that one off because I've got this one.
So when they grow, do they not grow more than one length then at the end that you just cut? There?
Sorry, where do you mean? Here?
No.
Here?
Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah, sure. So what I've done is I've shortened up these branches to make them more even length, so I didn't, because this one, sorry, it's in behind. This one here is so big and thick, I didn't want it to be really dominant and not these ones not to grow. So I've just trimmed these to an outward facing bud. So I've got the leaf buds all the way along these branches, and what I've done is pruned to an outward facing bud. So what that means is that when this comes into life in the spring, the sap flow will go up and force that bud there at the end to grow out, and that will be the rest of the branch would grow out from there. This one's a little bit damaged on the end, but that will be sort of the same effect as that bud on the end will grow out. So they'll all sort of grow out like that. And so then I want to remove all of the rest of these branches, and I want to encourage another tier of branches further up. Heard that gasp. Gee. Okay, cool. Man, that's changed. Cool. This is quite a drastic one, just simply because those two existing branches were so dominant. So I've got this semi-tear. It will be a proper tear when they start growing again. And I probably, 60 to 80 centimetres. Because there's two ways to do this. What will happen in spring is that this will come into life, come into leaf, and new branches will start growing at around near the top. What I want to do is make sure that the branches happen at this height. So what I'm going to do is just trim it off at the top, and what that will do is the same thing as sort of here. When the sap rises up, it can't go any further at the top. It forces these buds below it to grow out. It will naturally form a new leader. It just was what it wants to do. It has apical dominance, so it wants a main central leader that will form naturally and grow out nice and straight, and then you'll have more branches being formed around here. Any new growth here gets stripped off. You just want to have 4 or 5 evenly spaced around the tree trunk there. So that's that. So it seems quite drastic, and I've taken off quite a lot of the tree, but as you can see, what will happen now is with the pruning that I've done, it's not going to waste any energy on all of that was there. It's going to be in the branches that I actually want to keep, that'll be the really productive ones in 2 years' time when it starts fruiting. It's just a bit different to my other example. I'll just show you the tree from this morning's pruning session. Whoa. Because this had already quite a lot of existing branches which were already quite evenly sized, I pruned it quite differently. So you can kind of see how we're going to end up in the same place with a central leader tree with a tier of branches at this height, but because I just sort of had to customise it, and that's the kind of thing. You're never going to get a tree which is going to be exactly like the one I'm demonstrating with, or the two that I'm demonstrating with.
So now are you going to try and tie those bottom branches down a bit?
Yes, so with these ones, yes, I would. Yeah, these ones are big enough too. I wouldn't with these ones. I'd wait until they're more like this sort of size. Yeah. And this was the same again, like these 2 or 3 branches were quite a lot bigger and stronger, just thicker than these other 2. So I'd shortened those ones up just slightly so that they're more the same sort of length, but more evenly balanced. Yeah.
So a tier is about 6 branches?
Yeah, 4 to 6. Yeah, just being evenly spaced around the trunk, so that they're not going to shade each other and so that they're just nice and evenly spaced.
Can we have a little bit of repeat on the question, please, Kate, for the lovely people watching at home?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
The questions that people are asking.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. Yeah, I've now forgotten what that question was, but
No,
I'll do it from now on. Thanks for the reminder.
How many branches on the tier?
Thank you, yes. So for these, the question was how many branches there should be on a tier for a central leader tree, and the answer is really between 4 and 6, and it just depends on how the branches are orientated on the tree already. Right, okay. Any other questions about pruning apples and pears?
What about an older tree?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Fully grown and everything.
Sure. So the question is around more established trees and how to prune them. So first thing really with any established fruit trees for pruning is to look at the dead disease damage thing. And getting that out of the way. So removing any branches which are dead, diseased or damaged, or actually any that are crossing, so any that are sort of like going across each other. Another rule of thumb is that you don't want to take off more than 20 or 30% off the tree in one season, because what will result if you take off more than that is heaps of vigorous vegetative growth, which will end up the tree being way bigger than it even started with as. So you don't want to do too much too soon. Sometimes you might find that even just doing the dead disease damage is 20 or 30% of the tree if it's not in good condition. So sometimes there needs to be a staged approach to getting an older tree under control. And it might be about, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to make a nicer looking tree? Are you trying to get the size down? Is it too congested and you're trying to thin it out? Yeah, those sorts of things. So what situation have you got with yours?
It would be
all of the above.
So it'd be more thinning it out
Yep.
and bringing it down a wee bit.
Okay.
So it's not so
To make
high.
the most of what's on there, so it can actually get some light in and
Sure.
things aren't rubbing up against each other and getting damaged.
Sure. Okay, so more thinning out the tree and opening it up so it's more productive.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think now's a good time to do that in the winter when you can see the bare bones of the tree. And as I say, do the dead disease damage first, and you might find that actually thins it out enough, and then moving through just gradually. It might sometimes what you find with bigger older trees is that you could do it as a staged approach in dealing with one branch of the tree at a time, so one limb, shortening all the branches on that, and then the next season shortening all the branches on the other one, because if you do it all at once, like I say, you might end up with lots of vigorous vegetative growth that just congest the whole tree again. Yeah, does that help? Yeah, cool. One of the things I'd really suggest with pruning is using a pruning paint like Back Seal or the Seal and Heal or Prune Tech. They're really good products. We use them in the nursery. We would never prune and not use them in the nursery. The idea is that they help with the tree to heal the pruning wound and prevent any diseases entering the tree through the wound. And I would suggest using them on any pruning wounds which are bigger than little finger thickness or pencil thickness, and just other good hygiene sort of tips of cleaning your secateurs and pruning tools with a methylated spirits solution, and having a sprayer bottle with the meth solution and a rag is a good idea. So just between each tree, give your tools a bit of a spray before moving on, because you never know what's disease spores that are microscopic. You just never know if you are moving them from one tree to another. Yes?
Columnar apple, would that be similar to?
No, not at all. So
Not.
Right, so the question is about the columnar apple trees, if that pruning is similar. And these are the ballerina apples, which naturally only grow to about 30 centimetres wide and 2 or 3 metres tall. In theory, they don't need any pruning. Occasionally, and some varieties which are more vigorous, can produce... there is one over there, but that's okay. They can produce, this isn't one of those trees, but sort of branches which are a bit like that. And I've seen some people leave them on, and I've seen some people take them off. And it's really up to you. If you want to keep it very narrow, take them off. But if you're quite happy for it to get a wee bit wider, and they don't tend to just do one branch if they're going to throw a branch. But they still stay very columnar. They don't ever grow very wide. They sort of go up and quite upright like that. So it's up to you whether you cut it off flush. I wouldn't shorten it. I don't think that would be a good thing to do. There's no right or wrong reason answer with that one.
But you can cut the central piece if you want to keep it at a reasonable height.
But it will still regrow a new leader.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. They naturally have this thing in them, this plant hormone in them, that they want to have a new leader. So if you cut it off, it will just, the highest bud will go up and a new one. I mean, which you can just keep going. You know, if you do just want it at that height, just keep pruning it off, which is not a terrible thing to do. Yeah. Lots of questions, right. In the blue at the back.
How far off the ground should the first tier be?
Okay, that's a good question. So it was how far off the ground should the first tier be? Well, so there's a long answer. There's actually no short answer. There's only a long answer. In the nursery, when we're growing our trees, they're all grown in the field. And they're lifted out of the ground in the winter when they're dormant. And to do that with our tractors, we can't have any branches between here and here. So all of our trees won't have any growth under 60 centimetres. So 60 centimetres is the lowest you can have your branches. Higher than that, it really depends on the position in the garden and what you want to do. Do you want to underplant it with something? Do you want to plant it in the lawn, so you want to mow under it, so then you want the branches to be higher, so you're not whacking your head on it? Or, it just is a bit of more the situation sort of thing. Yeah. Do you have a particular...
We've got one where some of the branches are quite low and some of the fruit actually just about hangs down on the ground.
Yeah. Not great, lots of risk of disease stuff, but you could also thin the fruit so on those lower branches so it's not so heavy, so that it's not weighing them down so much. And you do your fruit thinning with your in December normally would be the time to do that. Yeah. Yes, an orange.
An established fruit tree.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of vertical.
Yeah.
What should you do?
Yeah, good question. Okay, great. So the question is around the vigorous upright growth you can get on your fruit trees, and often that'll happen when you've got a branch which is more horizontal. There's two things you can do. You can either cut it right off, right it down to the branch, or you can shorten it. What sort of trees were they? An apple tree. Okay, great. So with the apple trees, I'll just demonstrate a funny. So say you've got an upright growth like this. Because apple trees produce fruit on spurs, and they produce fruit on those spurs all the way along the branches, and those spurs produce fruit year after year. They don't need to be cut off they shouldn't be cut off. They stay on there and are productive each year. What you can try and do is shorten these branches to 2 or 3 buds, so that you can see the growing nodes here. Cut it down to 2 or 3 buds, and you may get spurs forming off those, so that you get more productivity in here. So, because what can happen is that you have sort of quite a lot of this upright growth, and it's just a matter of cutting that off annually each year, or even in the summer when it's just small, just trimming it back. Yeah. In the blue.
I've got a dwarf apple tree that doesn't seem to understand it's a dwarf, and it's gotten really big. And
Okay.
I'm a bit worried about eaves and things like that in the house for sale.
Sure. Okay, so there's a dwarf apple tree which is growing quite tall, and when you say tall, is it a dwarf apple tree, an apple tree on a dwarf rootstock, or a dwarf variety? Do you know what it is?
I think it's a dwarf variety.
So Blush Babe, maybe? Cool. Okay. Okay. So that's one that naturally sort of grows in a bit of a bush, sort of on a stem, on a standard. Its branching is quite rigid, so it's not like you can prune, you can't train it, sort of like these ones. It would be some selective pruning to just get some size down is really all you can do there. You might find that pruning during the summer is more effective than winter pruning to keep the vigour down. So that would probably be, you might want to do a bit of, have you got certain branches which are taller, or is it the whole thing which has got quite big?
No, in the centre it seems to have gotten like more with that main leader.
Okay, yeah. It's not the rootstock growth, is it? No. Okay. I'd deal with some of that vigorous growth from that main thing now and try and shorten that. And then through the summer, maybe just give it a good, literally a clip with loppers. We just went out of my head. Just all around the outside, just to sort of bring the size down. And what summer pruning does is that it sort of shocks the tree and stunts it a wee bit and removes a bit of its energy source. So that can be quite an effective way to help reduce the vigour. So if you do a little bit of winter pruning now to get those big bits down, and then a bit of summer pruning, and it might be a clip with your loppets in maybe December or January, when maybe you've got that much new growth, and then maybe repeat that again in February. Yeah, I think that would be quite a good way to get the size down. Okay, great. Any other questions on apples things at the moment? Okay, great. What I'm going to move on to now is pruning stone fruit. Oh, Olivia, can I have that other tree, please?
Just one question before you do that.
Sure.
Grapefruit trees.
Yep.
Our one's still doing its thing and produces grapefruits.
Yeah.
When's the best one to prune those back?
Yes, okay, great. So our question is about pruning grapefruit trees and the timing to do that. And I'm going to give one answer for here and one answer for anyone who might be watching this in the North Island. And it's still in fruit at the moment.
Yeah, still in fruit.
Yeah. So the difficulty is with most citrus is that they produce quite a lot. That most of them produce fruit in winter or spring, and so then getting the timing right for pruning can be a wee bit tricky. Also, in that when after fruiting this season, they've probably got next season's fruit already set as well. Realistically, you're going to sacrifice some of your crop. With citrus, you want to be trying to open up the centre of the tree, and I'll talk a bit about that with the peach tree, because it's the same sort of principles as having an open centre, so you can get really good airflow, and which helps with fruit production and also reducing pest problems. So because of the frost risk in this climate, I would recommend waiting until September to do any pruning in citrus, because what the pruning will do will encourage new growth, and the new growth is susceptible to frost damage. So I'd wait until later. And actually for the North Island people, that would be the same sort of answer. There's an issue with borer in the North Island, which is attracted, it gets into the citrus trees because it's attracted to the oils that the pruning wounds release, and it gets into the tree through the pruning cut. So you just need to be careful about not pruning during the summer. So if you're doing September pruning in the North Island for citrus, that would be fine. You just wouldn't want to probably leave it any later, and doing any pruning would be in the autumn or the spring for the North Island.
Are lemon trees the same?
And yeah, lemon trees would be the same. Yeah, any citrus. Yeah, but it's the same thing. You'll be sacrificing a bit of the crop because you'll be removing some of it. But it's just the way it is.
Because every leaf and branch is just about touching each other on the lemon tree, and you just can't even get in there to pick them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
would it be okay to just take a few little bits out or not?
Oh, now, do you mean? It would be risky just because it would... So pruning now for citrus is a risk of encouraging new growth and it being frosted. Can you cover it? Is it too big to cover?
It's taller than the garage. It's
Right.
just-
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Wait until September. I mean, it's not going to make much difference really between now and then. Yeah. Okay. Right. I'll get on to pruning this peach tree. So the idea with stone fruit is that we recommend a vase-shaped tree, so it's an open centre, and the idea with that is that you have an open middle of the tree so that it gets really good light through the tree, really good airflow, and that helps with pollination and fruit production with more light, and also reduces any pest risk because it's less dense and it's easier to control pests and diseases because you can get better penetration with sprays. So it's a similar principle to what I did with these other trees, is finding 4 or 5 branches which are evenly spaced around the tree. gap on that side. That one.
I might just remove some of these bottles and things. I
Oh.
assume they're in people's ways.
Can you see?
Can everybody see what Kate's doing?
Thank you.
Is that better to everybody? Oh, so is that just...
Maybe they come back this way. Is that okay? Better?
Does everyone can see?
Had a broken branch on that side, so it's got a gap. But I think that it'd be filled in by branches off these, so that will be okay. So what I've got these lovely branches which are evenly spaced around the tree just here, so it's quite simple really. I'm just going to take the central leader out, and I'm just going to do this cut on an angle so that there's no water pooling on the top. A slight angle. I'm not going to do it on an angle facing into one of the branches, because the water will just, it seems a bit silly because it will be an insignificant amount of water really that catches on the top of this cut. But if, continual bit of water just sitting in one of these branches will cause it to rot, and then it will be a bit of a problem. So I think I'm having a dilemma here, because there was a branch here which has been broken. Potentially that might form a branch. So I'm just going to cut just immediately above that, trying to do it away from any branches. So just on maybe like a 30-degree angle. You don't want it too steep. So that was it. Yeah, there's no refund on that bit. Right, so that was it, and that's it now. Yeah. So what that's going to do is now these will be your permanent branches, which are really nice and strong, an open centre, so that it's got really good airflow. And you think in the photo that you've got on the handout of probably a 10-year-old tree, you can see how this will be a tree like that has a really good structure. And if you left it like this, think in 10 years' time when each of those branches are that big at least, incredibly congested, will be an absolute nightmare. It'll be shaded and with lots of dead wood, and it'll be problematic. So really good idea to do this when the tree is young, so that it is a relatively small wound on here.
Well, obviously, why don't you sell them like
I was going to
that?
say, why don't you sell them?
So that we don't have to worry about
We do have this discussion. Some people would want the branches higher or lower. If you're doing an espalier peach tree, you'd be a bit annoyed that if it didn't have quite as many branches. You probably could use some of those other ones on it. I'm just trying to leave the options open. Yeah, with our plums, we do cut back some of the branches and some of the apricots to make them a bit.
At a nursery when you're getting one saying, I want to do this, I'm going to grow it in the middle of the lawn, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
They'll tell you to lock the chunk off it or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So, Olivia, would your staff do pruning like that for people to help them?
Absolutely.
Yeah, when they're buying them, yeah.
If they're experienced enough, and we
Yeah.
do have a lot of experienced staff.
Yeah,
but
sure.
obviously not all of them would be confident to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you'd have
You've got to
Yeah,
come
people.
back tomorrow.
So that's that one.
Can I just ask, I've got a dwarf
Oh yes.
nectarine tree, and right down at the base, I've got some big
Yeah.
things that have come out.
Okay.
What do I do with them?
Sure. So the question is around a dwarf peach or nectarine, which has lots of growth coming from the main trunk. So that's the rootstock suckering, and the rootstock we use is golden queen peach seedlings. It's kind of irrelevant, just out of interest. That's what it is. Because the dwarf variety, which is grafted on at the top, it's dwarf, it doesn't grow very much. The rootstock has lots of vigour and it wants to use it. So that's why it sprouts. So cut it off.
Okay.
Cut it off as soon as it grows. If you see a little leaf poking out, rub it off. much better to do it when it's smaller than when it's older. Yeah, no worries. You might get it happening from the base or up the trunk. Yeah, just cut it off as close to the trunk as you can. Lots of questions here. Yeah.
So next year that tree's going to throw out branches.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what's the pruning for the next
So
year?
good question, great question. So that is what happens next. So basically from this point, it's about maintaining this form, in that any inward facing branches should be removed. So anything that grows in here should be cut off to maintain that open centre. If perhaps one of these branches was more vigorous than the other, shortening them to make them a bit more even, that dead disease damaged thing, do that, and that would be it. Yeah. Yes.
Would that be the same principle for a cherry tree?
Yeah, cherry trees can go either way. You could prune them in this form or in that form. There's both options. Yeah.
Nectarines the same?
Yeah. So peaches, nectarines, apricots, plums, cherries, if you want to do cherries this way or that. Yeah.
Crazy one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Pruning banana trees.
Oh, no idea, sorry.
Growing out our back of our garage.
Wow, that's amazing. We're about in
Yeah,
the
you know,
city.
budget.
Yeah. With
Finger bananas, the little
oh
finger
yeah.
ones. So,
Is it Miss Loki or something like that maybe?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's quite weird.
Have you got, and it's flowering and fruiting? What, yeah, that's incredible. I don't know.
Okay.
There is on Facebook, there's a New Zealand tropical fruit growers page. Might be, and there's actually got quite a few banana growers from Gisborne and the Northland, which would be able to help with that. Yeah. I'm sorry, in behind you is a lady at the back. Yeah.
I've just sprayed my miniature fruits
Yep.
with the lime sulphur.
Yep.
And about to do the contour.
Yeah.
So at what point do you actually do the pruning?
There's no, anytime. There's no,
Because I read on the internet that it's like at bud burst and not before.
for pruning or the spraying.
The pruning.
No, you can do your pruning, at any time. Yeah. Oh, I know it's really hard. If you look online, you'll get told 6 different things. There's lots of different schools of thought, and what I try and do is try and keep things simple. Try and use things which are most common practice, and try and make it New Zealand specific. Sometimes some of that overseas stuff is around cold damage, that kind of thing, and really cold climates. That might possibly be about that timing.
So it doesn't make any difference as to what point of spraying you're at?
No.
You can prune any-
Realistically, it would be a good idea to prune then spray, because you're going to be giving your tree protection for those pruning wounds. Yeah. And you're just aware, I'm glad you haven't done your lime sulphur and your oil together, because they don't go together.
3 weeks apart?
Yeah. I'll talk a bit more about pest and disease prevention soon. Yes, question? Yeah.
Blueberries and cranberries?
Okay, so question about blueberries and cranberries. For pruning, I'm presuming? Yeah, sure. So blueberries. Dead disease damaged, because there can be a bit of that, a bit of dieback sometimes in blueberries. So getting rid of that. Apart from that, really not a lot of pruning required. They can produce these really vigorous water shoots, which don't look great and can often be one big spike above everything else. Can be really tempting to get rid of them, but we've found them to be really productive with fruit. So hold on to them.
Cool.
Yeah. And then it's really more about size and shape. If it's just getting a bit big, give it a prune. I'd avoid pruning in the autumn. They can get some fungal disease problems, so winter or closer to spring. The other thing I was thinking of, so they can, once they're more established, they can get quite dense. So it might be about thinning out whole canes and just opening it up a wee bit if it's getting quite jammed in there. Yeah. cranberries, is it the true cranberry, the ground covery one, or the New Zealand cranberry, the Myrtus agni?
It's actually
Standardised? Cool. Okay, cool. So that's the Chilean guava, New Zealand cranberry, Myrtus agni, Tassie berry. How many names can you give a plant? You can prune them at any time, really. Something about flowers. I'd prune it now, so then you're not going to be getting in the way of any new growth, which is where your flowers are formed. So yeah, you want to do it now so you get a new flush of growth. You'll get your flowers and those delicious, fragrant berries. They're so good. Yes, in the back again.
Anything special about transplanting them?
Yes, so transplanting trees, yes. How?
The cranberry and the blueberry.
Oh, the cranberry and the blueberry. Okay. So transplanting a cranberry or a blueberry, how old is it? Are they?
3 years old.
3 years old. Very well established or struggling?
High,
Okay.
They haven't got enough sun.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, sure. So moving any plants really should be done in winter because they're at their lowest point of growth. You want to reduce the amount of stress on the roots as much as possible. So getting as much roots as you can by and having the hole prepared already before you remove it. Pruning it, giving it a hard prune because really you want to balance the size of the roots with what's up top. Right, so if there's only that much roots, or that much root, they're quite shallow rooted though, both of them actually, so it won't be too difficult. You might just want to give them maybe a 25% cutback, just generally, just to reduce the stress. For other plants, I probably recommend putting your spade down and severing the surface roots a week prior, but I probably wouldn't with those types of plants because their root systems are so small and because it's only 3 years old. So if it was something bigger, I'd be going in a circle in the drip line with a spade down to spade depth just to sever those surface roots so that there's less shock when you actually do the big move. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So that's quite a random question. I think we've got all our fruit trees are dwarf, that appear with 3 on them and what have you. I can't find a plum tree. Is there?
Yes, that's a good question. So is there a dwarf plum tree? There are lots of dwarf fruit trees. We do peaches, nectarines, apricots, pears, apples. There is no dwarf plum.
Right.
We did have one, but it got tangled up in the MPI problem we had last year, so really disappointing that we had to destroy it. It had taken us about 10 years to get 3 plants, so that was it.
So what would be a small
Real
variety
shame. There's not really. The only thing you can really do to have a small plum tree is to espalier it,
Right.
which I'll talk about shortly,
Right.
or to prune hard during summer and make more like a fruit bush. And that would be about pruning to this right at the start and doing summer pruning so that, and I'll talk about that now in a bit more detail. So the theory of summer pruning is that you hit the tree hard when it's, well not hard, you hit the tree when it's growing, gives it a bit of a shock, removes a bit of its energy source. So this here will grow, say we just let it grow and the whole of next summer, it'll probably put on this much new growth on these branches. But if we let it grow till here in December and cut back its new growth, and that would fall like that is what it would, the new growth would grow out like that, and if we cut that half of the subsequent growth back, instead of going to there in that summer, it's only grown to here. So that's the theory around summer pruning, is that it's lots of small cuts repeatedly through the summer. Each time is a slight little stunt shock for the tree, removing some of its energy source because you're taking out some of its leaves. So that would be, you'd be keeping the plum tree to something like this.
Right.
Be really small, and it would be quite a lot of clipping. That's the way to do it. Yeah, I would love to have a dwarf plum.
Yeah.
It would be amazing. I mean, out of everything that we do, out of all of the Probably out of our numbers that we supply into garden centres, biggest fruit type would probably be citrus, but then after that blueberries and then plums, just in terms of raw total numbers. So yeah, they're up there, and it's because they're amazing and they're resilient and so productive, but to have a dwarf version be incredible. So it's definitely on my list, but it just takes a lot of time. Yeah.
So a quince is just like an apple?
You can actually do both. Quince trees are actually mostly self-forming in terms of their habit. They naturally grow into quite a lovely tree, so you don't really have to do a lot. What you can do is thinning out branches if it's getting quite congested. You can cut back the trees reasonably hard, actually. They're so productive. There were people here this morning which had maybe a tree which is 5 metres tall. They got 100 kilos of fruit off their quince trees. And then they said, should they prune it? And I was like, well, you probably got quince jelly for the next 20 years worth, so you probably, doesn't matter if you don't get a crop next year. So.
We got about that off our dwarf apple tree.
Oh, really? Yeah. That's fantastic, yeah.
Should we reduce some of it, because it actually breaks branches?
Oh, if it's breaking branches, you should definitely thin it, yeah. So, and thinning during December is the time to do apples, because that has that's when the fruit is at the right size. It's already done a natural shed probably of what it doesn't think it can handle, and then if you leave it any later, it's actually still going to have quite an impact on the health of the tree if it's... well, what I mean is that if a tree's got a heavy crop and it's left on the tree to ripen or thin too late, it still has the impact. It's taken so much energy to get to that point. It's still going to possibly get into a biennial bearing phase, and it's only producing a decent crop every second year. So if you have a tree that does that, thinning the fruit at early stage is a good idea. And trees like apricots, cherries, plums and pears are kind of the most susceptible for getting into a biennial bearing phase when they produce this huge crop, and then it goes into recovery mode for the next season.
This is on steroids, it does it every year.
That's great. Yes.
How about Feijoa trees?
Feijoa trees, yeah, good question. So Feijoa trees are really hardy and resilient. They can be pruned really hard, like down to a stump if you need to. Is it just a bit big, or is it too dense? Too big. So you want to do the pruning during winter. Yep. And just go, you can cut it back very hard if you need to. You'll still get a good crop this season because the flowers are produced at the base of the new growth. So where it starts growing in the spring, just at that point is where the flowers will be produced, so it shouldn't affect your next crop. Just on the Feijoa again, you want to try and go something similar to this, the peach with an open centre. You want to make it quite not too dense. You want to thin it out so it doesn't have so many branches in the middle. And because the important thing to remember with Feijoas is that it's actually birds that move the pollen from flower to flower. So if it's very dense, the birds can't move through the tree. If you thin out the branches and make it less dense, the birds are much happier in the tree and they'll stay there for longer. And they'll move the pollen around. They eat the petals and they get the nectar as well. And when they're doing that, they're picking up the pollen on their beaks and on their chests. And when they go on to the next flower, they're transferring it. It's quite cool. Yeah, and it's interesting because we've got the birds in New Zealand have really clicked onto Feijoas, and in other countries the birds aren't so active in Feijoas and they don't get as good a crops. So it's quite interesting. I think it's because they're very similar to rata and pohutukawa flowers. They're quite familiar with them. Yes.
So for pruning, like the time of the year, which is obviously, is it right now or is it sort of later on a wee bit?
Any time between, any time between when they drop their leaves and when they start getting much further advanced in bud break from this. Yeah, you don't.
So like sort of, if the next morning was going to be you knew there was going to be a frost, sort of thing, would you do it that?
Frost doesn't really matter so much. The main thing I'd be looking at is rain. Because I wouldn't want to do pruning today if the next week was going to be wet, because that's going to be really bad good conditions for disease development. So timing would be more around a dry spell of weather in the winter. So any time between April or May, depending on the type of tree, through just because apples and pears can sometimes still be in leaf in April, but peaches and nectarines would be dormant by that stage. So between April and August, any time in there. Yeah. Yes.
Figs.
Figs. Okay. Yeah. Figs. Pruning figs. So do you have a specific question about it, or like any?
I've got one that's just a year old that had some fruit that didn't ripen this year, and then I've got one that's 2 years old. It's getting quite big.
Okay, sure. So figs are a type of tree which naturally form quite a multi-leaded tree, and it's the kind of tree that you can prune it so it has sort of a main trunk and then branches, or a multi-leader from the base, and it's up to you whether you do one or the other. They do tolerate really hard pruning, so if it gets a bit too much, you can prune them really hard. Figs in this climate, it's a wee bit marginal. They do need to be in a very warm position. I'd really only recommend early ripening varieties, because the later ones just won't probably ripen. It'll be getting too cold in the autumn for the later varieties to ripen. Brown turkey, Brunswick, Cape White, Mrs. Williams. I'll just finish off about figs, and I was speaking to someone earlier about figs as well before we started. Just to be aware that the sap is really irritating on your skin, including the milky sap from when you're picking the fruit. Don't get it on your skin, especially in the sun. It can cause blisters. It's so bad. So just be really aware of that when pruning your figs. Yes.
Almond tree on pruning an almond. Just the same sort of thing?
Yeah. So almond trees are really closely related to peaches and nectarines. So in that, an almond is like an almond fruit just looks like a really small furry peach. So we do it as an open centre vase shape, just like that. Yeah, just
so
like a peach.
One sort of got away a wee bit on it.
Yeah.
Can you cut it back pretty heavy, or what?
It's the same rules of thumb of not more than 20 or 30% in one go. So it might be just taking out the central leader for a start, and then the next season getting rid of anything inward facing to try and get something towards a vase shape. Yeah.
Mine's a dwarf one.
Oh, a dwarf almond? Yeah. So with the dwarf almonds and also the dwarf peaches and nectarines, they can be it can have a lot of very congested growth, and so what I recommend with those is to thin out the branches so that you're almost doing like a mini vase shape for each cluster. They can kind of have a whole cluster of 10 branches all really close together, so taking out the middle ones, maybe 3 or 4 of the branches, so it's a bit more open, be what I'd recommend. Also, because they set fruit very prolifically, I recommend thinning the fruit really hard in November or December. Probably want to have a couple of goes at it. My brother's got 3 or 4 dwarf peaches and nectarines, and he works in an orchard. He really knows about fruit, and he is every year incredibly surprised at how much he needs to thin these trees. He goes through and thins them. Next week he'll go back and go, did I even do it? There's just so much there. And so goes through again, does another round of thinning, and even so he probably gets it must be 10 kilos a plant or something like that. And these are little trees like this. They're just incredible. So thinning out the fruit, because if they bear too heavily, then they're not going to fruit the following season as much. But also if they get any rot, it travels really quickly from fruit to fruit if they're touching. So the idea is that you thin the fruit so they're unlikely to touch each other. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so dwarf fruit trees can be grown in a pot. Yeah, absolutely. They're just probably like a wine barrel size is what you want to do, and use really good potting mix, and use liquid fertiliser to keep them well fed and keep them really well watered. some more questions sort of down the back. Yeah.
Yes, pruning pomegranates.
Okay, pruning pomegranates. Have you got one at the moment, or you just?
About 2 years old.
Okay.
2 years old.
Yeah. Is it more bushy or?
It's still in its sort of juvenile shape.
Okay. Yeah. Is it? So it's.
Probably 12 or 14 branching.
Yeah. And has it got a stem, or is it clumpy, like just all coming from the base?
It's mostly coming from the base.
Okay, great. So pomegranates will grow to only a 2 or 3 metre tree. They can grow more as a bush, or with a bit of work, you can make them into a tree with a trunk and then the bush part on the trunk. So yeah, it's just about what you want really. You don't have to prune it. If you did want it as the trunk and then the tree, you're going to have to get onto that pretty soon to choose a main leader and single that up using a bamboo cane or a stake or something, keeping that going, and then have the branch above that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just you need a very long hot summer for that fruit to ripen. So yeah, climate change.
It looks pretty though.
They are beautiful, and the flowers are just amazing. They're so cool. Yes.
What about avocados?
About pruning them. Do you have one? How big is it? Yeah. Oh, you probably don't need to prune it yet. Right. Avocado is it a normal avocado or a dwarf one? Okay. Yeah, you will need to prune it because that tree is going to naturally grow to 10 metres tall. So you just regular pruning. Yeah. No. Yeah. Prune it sooner rather than later. Yeah, because you'll want some branches quite low down on the tree, because otherwise it's going to be only branches near your roof. So, yeah. Yes.
On your website, you've got the family tree
Oh,
planting.
yes, cool.
And last week we planted 4 different plum trees together.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you've got any other tips on pruning that once you sort of cut the inward facing branches.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So it's about the family tree planting concept, and for those people who haven't heard of that, it's something we've been talking about for the last couple of years on our website. We've got a video on there. So the idea is that you plant 2 to 5 trees in one hole, so 4 plum trees together, and the idea is that instead of going for a double or triple grafted tree, you can choose what varieties and perhaps plant it so that they cross-pollinate and then spread the harvest season as well. So you could choose varieties that ripen from Christmas time through to Omega plums in late summer, something like that. So the idea is that you prune off you basically treat it as almost like one tree. So you've got 3 trees. This is going to be tricky. How do I explain this? It's better to have visuals. You prune so you've only got outward facing branches, and the trees are sort of in a circle in your hole, and there's no branches coming into the centre. The idea is that you basically, for each tree you've got there, it's sort of a quarter of the size of a normal tree, so you're going to get less fruit per tree, but in the space of what would have been one standard tree, you've got fruit over a long succession. You choose types of fruit which are, you could do peaches and nectarines together because they're so closely related and the trees look almost identical, and the roots would bond together and grow together to form a very strong base. I would not recommend doing a peach, a plum, an apricot and a pear because it would look weird because they're all such different trees and the roots aren't compatible with each other. They wouldn't grow together. So say 4 plums, early to late, something like that. So probably not a lot more advice than what you've seen on there. Just be about that maintaining that pruning because the trees are going to naturally grow some branches towards the middle, and just about maintaining that so you only making small pruning cuts rather than large ones once that growth gets bigger. Yeah, cool though. I'd love some photos if you want to send them through. It's cool. Yeah. Yes.
Kiwi fruit.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Question. Yeah.
Like, how many flavors and how many?
So questions about kiwi fruit. You've got some plants?
Yes.
Lucky you.
And they grow wild.
Yeah, they are very vigorous. So I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in kiwi fruit pruning. It's a bit of a mystery to me, but I think you'd need to cut it back quite hard each season, cut back the old canes quite hard and leave some of the new growth, which is where the fruit is produced in the following season. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not something that I know much about, to be honest. Sorry.
And like with your apple trees, you recommend horizontal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would that the same thing apply for
kiwi fruit? So kiwi fruit are normally trained on a trellis or some sort of framework.
Yeah, I have got some. More leaves than otherwise you end up with so many sort of close together.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know enough about it. But I think that you don't need to train them to horizontal because the framework provides the structure and they're so productive. Yeah. So is your framework like a trellis like this, or is it a pergola sort of thing?
Yeah, I've sort of built it out.
Oh, yeah. So it's growing horizontally is how it...
Well, and I was going to tie some of them down to those. So
Yeah, that would be fine. Yeah, I mean, in the orchard, the kiwi fruit orchards are like, they're 6 foot high trellis systems, and it's like a canopy over the top. So you walk underneath it, and the fruit's hanging down. So they just lay the canes right across the top of the trellis, across the structure. Is that similar to what you've got, or? Yeah, so it sounds like you're on the right track. Yeah. Sorry, it's a little bit outside of my knowledge, and because with the kiwi fruit disease PSA, we can't grow kiwi fruit for garden centres anymore, so we're out of that. Sorry. You sit at the back.
Do apple trees have a life expectancy?
Do apple trees have a life expectancy? I guess I would expect an apple tree to be most productive for 20 or 30 or 40 years, and at that point they won't die, but they'll decline and become less productive. Though we all see 100-year-old trees out the back of farms or on the side of the road, and they look like they've been there for 50 plus years. So is it? Wow, yeah.
And I vased it.
Yeah.
And took 30% grass to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But it's got really bad codling moth.
Okay, yeah.
And I just don't seem to be able to get rid of it.
What are you doing to try and get rid of the codling moth?
Well, I've heard you can put the hessian around the bottom of petrol, is it?
Oh.
No. That might be another one for me to Google.
Yeah, I don't know. Petrol and fruit trees don't go together for me. So.
I've just sprayed it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, can we talk about that when I get onto the spraying later on? Because I've got a whole thing, not a whole thing, but I've got a spiel about codling moth. So I'll wait for that. That's okay. Any more pruning specific questions? Okay. Cool. How are we going for time, Olivia?
10 past 2.
Okay, cool, great, we're doing well, that's good. So I'm going to talk a bit about nutrition and pest and disease prevention, and then I'll be last questions, and then I'll be on the way to the airport. Oh yes, sorry, yes, thank you. I was thinking, I'm forgetting something. Right, okay. So, espalier training. Thank you for reminding me of that. It's bad to forget about that. Right, so The easiest fruit trees to do espalier training is apples and pears. And the reason for that is because they produce fruit on spurs, which is the short stubby growth which forms all the way along the branches. In comparison to that, the peaches and nectarines produce fruit only on previous season's growth. So the new growth that we can see with the fluffy buds, that'll be the flower buds in spring, that's only on the new growth from last summer. So last summer's growth on peaches and nectarines is what produces fruit this coming season. So what that means for if you did an espaliered pear tree, an espaliered peach tree, is that all of your fruit would only be sort of on the ends of the branches, and it just makes it a wee bit trickier to try and make sure that you've got as much of the space as productive as possible, because that's what you want. You're putting in espaliered fruit trees because they look beautiful and you've probably got limited space and you want to maximise the production in the space. Doing that with apples and pears, you can make this formal structure, and that's productive on that all of those branches year after year, and without having to worry about them really. It's just the maintenance pruning. But the tricky thing with stone fruit is that across stone fruit it's actually different, because peaches and nectarines are on produce fruit on previous season's growth, and then cherries, plums and apricots produce fruit on sort of 2-3-year-old wood, and so it's just a little bit of working out how to do that. So for apples and pears, you can do lots of different shapes, but the most common one is the horizontal tiers, which, for this tree, there's a great set of branches just right there that it could be the first tier, and chop all these off and just repeat this process that I talked about earlier, where you do it further down, because normally you'd have sort of 30 centimetres apart between the tiers, between your wires. So around here, you'd make this pruning cut in the winter. So when the sap flow rises up in the spring, when it starts growing, it hits this, doesn't have anywhere else to go apart from making these buds grow. One of them becomes the new leader, 2 become the new branches there. And that new leader will grow up again, chop it again, new branches, new leader. So in the first season, you can probably you've got this tier sorted already. This tier would grow during the summer. You probably get that tier starting to grow by the end of the summer. So you get within one summer, you've really got quite a good structure already starting. With this, one of the things with tying the branches down on your fruit trees is that when they get down, the whole thing gets down to horizontal, the end stops growing. So what you want to do is gradually tie that down, so you've always got the end 20 centimetres free and not tied down. And as it grows along, you gradually tie it down so that until it reaches the width that you want it to be, and then you tie the end right down. It will really slow down the growth and stop it growing very much out the end.
Tie them down with anything special to tie them down with? I
would recommend using that soft fabric you can get in a ball. It's like t-shirt material. Yeah, and then because it's soft, and it also so it won't cut in when they grow, and these will actually not even need really the structure eventually, so they don't need to be tied down for 20 years. Once they're tied down for a year, it'll probably just stay there, so, and that fabric perishes, so it'll fall off eventually. Just gradually tying that down as they go, and the same with these ones, gradually tying them down as they grow. Yeah, so do that with apples and pears. For stone fruit, like I said, it's a bit trickier with the way where they produce fruit, so that's why for those we'd recommend a fan shape espalier. And so you'd have a structure of maybe 5 branches, and say if it was a peach, those 5 branches would fruit, and while they're fruiting, they're growing new growth out the end and off to the side, and when that new growth is fruiting in the following season, it's getting bigger, and that's where the fruit is, and there's all this gap of unproductive space. So what you'd need to do is selectively remove one of those or shorten those main branches to allow new growth to happen. Because you wouldn't want to cut it right back to get lots of new growth, because you lose the shape. So if you do it as a gradually staged approach, so that you're removing it to allow a new lot of growth in one branch while the other one fruits, that sort of thing. So it's a bit staggered.
Same with crab apple?
Crab apples you treat like apples, just the
yeah.
same. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So a persimmon would be similar to an apple?
Yes, a persimmon could be trained in espalier just like an apple. You could also do it as a fan. I'd be wary with bending the branches very hard because they're really brittle. And I'd also be really wary about not having too heavy a crop of fruit on the branches and making sure they're well supported, because they're they're liable to break if it's under too much strain.
What about citrus?
So citrus can be espaliered for sure. Yeah, there's a really fabulous garden centre in Papamoa that has espaliered citrus. Normally, for tiers of branches, I would suggest that far apart, but for citrus, I'd probably go a wee bit wider because the growth is so dense and being evergreen. Like you just go for tiers or a fan shape, which is, more like informal.
We've got a lemon that grows a bit smaller than a soccer ball, a bit bigger than a softball.
Right.
Huge monster one, and
Yeah.
that's quite a heavy.
Yeah,
the
that
fruit's
probably.
extremely heavy, so
Yeah.
You don't know what variety it is.
That's
at all.
unusual, isn't it?
I've got 5 of them now. I've done by cutting,
Yeah.
but it really does. Each year they get bigger.
Wow. And still a reasonable size crop of fruit that's that big. Yeah.
fruit.
And
Yeah.
we have to hold them up.
That's incredible. Wow. Yeah. How fantastic. I'd be a little bit wary about doing those as an espalier because of the weight of those on the branches might be too much. So just might need to have very well supported.
When you
Tiers.
espalier apple trees and we're going to have a row of them, can we intermingle the...
You can, the branches can cross over if you've got a row of espaliers, but they will shade each other a bit. So it would be okay on the ends, but you wouldn't want a huge amount to cross over, though then there's a way to do, there's quite a cool thing you can do. Instead of doing your tiers like this, you can crisscross the trees, like do individual trees, like crisscrossed, and then like make a lattice sort of pattern. That's quite cool. Or you can do angled, like all in one row. Looks quite good too. So. Yeah, it is a little bit. Yeah. The tiered thing is by far the simplest and most effective. Yeah. Right. So, any more questions about espaliered fruit trees?
what's your individual pruning once they're starting to grow along your wires?
Yes.
What are you pruning? The bits that are obviously going to stick up along.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah. Good question. So the maintenance pruning is, you're right. With these being horizontal, you do get quite a lot of vigorous upright growth off these, and it's just a matter of cutting those and shortening them down. Like I was saying before, about to 2 or 3 buds, and you might get those turned into a spur. That's just a regular maintenance thing.
And you can do that any time.
Yep, anytime. Yeah, better to do it in the summer, like the summer pruning thing I was talking about earlier, knocking the growth and stunting it a bit. That would be perfect.
So that's that upright pruning you're doing through the summer.
Yeah, just regular.
Rather than leaving it for winter.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that, and it's actually good to do it as a regular process. Yeah. Cool. Okay, great. I'll talk about the pest and disease and nutrition thing now. So for new trees, the focus with the pruning and the training is to really get your tree in the first couple of years really dedicating it to the development of a good structure of branches and root development and that sort of thing. And so for that, with that in mind, you really want quite a nitrogen-based fertiliser. So you could go something like Nitrofosca Blue or another product like that, or using compost and manure and that sort of thing to have quite a heavy focus on nitrogen, because it's the nitrogen that produces lots of vigorous vegetative growth, because you want it to focus on that, not to be so much into the fruit production for a start. So
when planting a tree, how much of that would you put into the hole?
I wouldn't bother doing anything if you're planting now, because it's just going to leach away before it really starts growing. So for this, a small handful. Yeah, it's because it says for established trees, 80 grams a square metre, but it's not established, so 60 grams, which is a small handful per square metre. Yeah, a small handful I think would be fine, just as a top dressing on a tree once it started coming into leaf.
And is it worth putting neem granules in when you're planting, or do you again just put it on the surface and let it water in?
Well, I've got this thing, and I don't really like to use general insecticide products if I don't have a problem. So if you've got problems with pests...
No, I'm just going to start...
Yeah, no, I think... Yeah, I'd be...
Some people swear by it, and I just wondered...
Oh, I know, yeah, and I haven't used neem granules at all myself. I'm more inclined to do an oil in the winter as my general protectant, because there's not so many beneficial insects really around in the winter. So you're doing a conqueror oil or a neem oil as a smothering insecticide, which gets rid of any pests which are on the tree, any eggs in the winter. So that would be all I do. And then I'd just use another product, an oil, possibly in the summer, if I had something like aphids, just dealing with an issue that I had, rather than a general thing just in case there's something around. So I'd just be quite focused on if there's a presence of a pest, dealing with that. Yeah.
So you could use that, you could use that copper now?
Oh, the conqueror oil, yeah, that's a winter product. Yep, absolutely. Yep, so that would be for the insect prevention. Yeah, question at the back there?
What do you spray?
For thrips? Okay, so for thrips is, I'll just see whether this can be used. Yeah, conqueror oil can be used for thrips. Yeah, yeah. It's more of an autumn. Have you got thrips at the moment? Oh, really? Yeah, okay. It might take a few applications. Yeah, yeah. What sort of plants? Viburnum, yeah. You're either going to say viburnum or Portuguese laurel. Yeah, yeah.
And that is where the neem granules are amazing.
Oh, right, okay.
That's what I do, and I've never had thrips with my viburnums.
Oh, right, yeah.
And any
Would,
customer that buys a viburnum, I always talk to them about neem granules.
do
about
they...
the prevention of thrips.
Yeah, so but if she's got thrips in her viburnum now, would neem be effective enough?
No.
No, okay, so neem oil or conqueror oil to smother the bugs that are around now. Yeah.
And then I would also recommend, future use, putting the granules in for the next time.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yes, question back.
We have beehives, does that hurt our bees?
Yes, if it contacts them. Yes. Yeah.
They go looking for it?
Pardon?
Sorry, I'm talking to myself. They go looking for it, the bees.
It's just an oil. I don't think it would have anything sweet or anything attractive for them in it. Yeah, yeah. Right, so that's what I do as a general thing, as a winter process, as an oil for your deciduous trees to prevent pest problems. The other product for a winter application is copper. And this liquid copper is really easy to mix up. Copper is used in organic situations. A really good product to use for a dormant spray to get rid of, to kill any disease spores which are on your tree from the previous season to stop them reinfecting in the following season. So things like black spot, leaf curl, powdery mildew, those sorts of problems. So a winter application of liquid copper. For leaf curl in peaches and nectarines, it can be quite tricky to control. So this actually to prevent that, you really need to do repeated applications of copper just before they start flowering and every 7 to 10 days after that until it's in full leaf. It's quite a lot. And any time it rains, you lose some of you lose the protection because it washes this off. So you can get a sticking product, which is available here to help stick the product to the tree, but it's something like it will last if it's a 5 mil rain event. If it's a 50 mil rain event, the protection's gone. So that can be what's really tricky with preventing leaf curl in peaches and nectarines, is because it rains so regularly during that period where it's really the disease pressure is really high in that period in spring. So it's just repeated applications. It's usually actually just young trees which are more susceptible, and as the trees get older they seem to build up natural resistance. Yeah.
So the conker oil, that's not something you're using after the buds are burst?
You can do, but you need to use a lighter rate. There's a weaker solution, and I think it has to be under certain degrees, because otherwise it will be burned.
There's no general reason for doing it?
Sorry?
I'm just thinking of bees or insects and things.
Sure, yeah.
You wouldn't do that unless you really had to?
Exactly, yeah. So doing it as a general thing in the winter is I'm personally okay with, because there's so little beneficial activity around at that time, and then be very concentrated on the time that you use it in any other time of year so that you're not impacting any beneficials. So for bees are not as active in cooler temperatures, so earlier in the morning or later in the evening would be okay to use. You do need to be careful. Being an oil, you don't want to use it if it's over 32 degrees. The leaves will get burned. Just being a little bit careful.
Didn't they used to use the two together?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can mix conker oil and copper. Some people like to use lime sulphur instead of copper, but you can't mix that with oil. So that you can put those two together though. Yeah. We talked about codling moth before. So codling moth it can be quite difficult to control if it is a big tree and if it's got a bad infection, because it is recurrent year after year. So you can get pheromone traps which help the triangle corrugated plastic triangles which have the pheromone in them. Some people think that is the solution, but it's actually just the monitoring device. So you hang the pheromone trap in the tree from September through to December, and when there's a high level activity, that's when you use a spray. So, and this is a really clever new-ish product from Yates. It's called Success Ultra, and it's derived from beneficial soil bacteria is how they produce this, and it's specific. And this is one of the products that's really clever because it's really specific to caterpillars, and that's what the codling moth is. So the idea with your trap is that you trap them when there's a high level activity, then you spray, because you don't want to be spraying, every week of 4 months of the spring. It would be ridiculous. So you can use the traps as a monitoring thing and then be really concentrated on when you're spraying. There's other hygiene things, like if you've got infected fruit, not just leaving them around the base of the tree for them to overwinter and then reinfect in the following season. Cultivating the soil underneath the tree, and because the larvae overwinter under the tree, that's when you can use neem granules under the tree. We've got chooks, they'll gobble them up, putting them in the space under the tree.
How do you know if you've got it?
They're in your fruit.
One of our trees has got something wrong with it, but we don't know what it is that's wrong with it.
It's like green it looks like green like on the moss grime.
Oh, that's lichen, but I mean we've got these tiny, tiny little clusters that look like cotton wool.
Oh, that's woolly apple aphid. That's, not codling moth. That's quite hard.
Do we need to chop that one down?
It doesn't, it's not flowering the apples on it or growing on it.
It'll be weakening the tree. So what? Yeah. So where those woolly apple aphids will be eating the roots. That's where they live, and they feed on the roots and damage the roots, and then they, at some point in the year, they come up and burrow into the branches, and that's where you get the white cotton woolly sort of look as their bums, the aphids. And that's what you've got. Most rootstocks on apple trees that we use are naturally resistant to woolly apple aphids, so it's not a very common problem. It's usually just with older trees. And I'm just trying to think. Neem, we have some issues with some of the rootstocks we use aren't resistant to woolly apple aphid, and we find it, even the chemicals that we have access to that aren't available to home gardeners, we even find quite tricky to control. Just trying to think, all of the things are being taken off the market. Like Confidor would be one that you could use as a drench. It's pretty toxic stuff, and so it's quite difficult. What you could try neem granules around the tree, and do it now while they're actually in the roots at that stage, and you might as well give them a blast with some, if they're on the tree at the moment, maybe try smothering them with some conker oil or neem oil. Yeah.
So what was the name of that product?
This one for the codling moth, Yates Success Ultra.
One for the moss.
For getting rid of moss on the tree, you can use lime sulphur, as long as it's not an apricot tree.
What is that?
No good. It's actually not too bad for the tree. It's usually.
Fruit.
Oh, it won't be because of the moss, probably. Is it flower?
Not here.
Do you get good frosts where you're in your reed? Yeah. Do you? It doesn't flower. How old is it?
5 years old.
I wouldn't be too worried. Apricot trees can take up to about 5 years to produce fruit. Is it growing very well?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's a dwarf one. It's just
Okay, right, yeah. We had this conversation in the other session. The dwarf apricots can be quite shy bearers, so and they can be quite weak growers, and it sort of goes hand in hand. So if it's not growing vigorously or growing well, then it's going to struggle to produce much fruit. So I'd suggest if it doesn't flower very well this season, spend next summer giving it a good amount of nitrogen-based fertiliser like nitrophosphate. If it does flower well, use sulphate of potash to help support the fruit production, and once you've finished using this in the autumn, move on to that, so you've got the nitrogen to give it lots of leafy growth, and then the potash for the potassium to try and encourage it to flower. And you put that on in the autumn because deciduous trees decide in the autumn, the buds decide whether they're going to be flower buds or leaf buds. And so if you don't put the potassium on at the right time, then you're not giving it you've got to give it the nutrients at the right time to encourage it. So potassium in spring and autumn is the right time for that. But I'll be honest in that those dwarf apricots, I've been really tempted to stop growing them because some people get great crops and some people don't get much at all, and I feel people will be disappointed. But then there's all these people that are really happy, so I'm really, really torn about it. And people want them, like the dwarf plum. Like if we didn't have a dwarf apricot, people would be forever asking for them. Oh, yes.
Just a question on the spray.
Yes.
My son's got fruit trees and that sort of thing, but they've got fruit, the fells and chooks and everything running around.
They've got what, sorry?
He's got chooks and everything
Oh,
running
yeah,
all
yeah.
around that area. So to spray the trees with the shortages, that would be a no-no?
I'll have to do a disclaimer that I'm not an expert in this. So for the copper, it says, do not allow pets and children to enter the treated area until the spray has dried. So there's only when dry, withholding period, not even a day or anything, so just when it's dry. There's no caution for the oil at all about that. Yep, I wouldn't be worried about that for the oil. Yeah, no problem. Okay, I think we're just about done. Thanks so much for coming along. Really lovely to see you all and being so keen about growing fruit in your home gardens, which is such a fantastic thing. I'll be here till 3 to answer any more questions, and just thanks for coming along. And if do you have any questions, feel free to come up. Yeah, sure.
Is there one particular sort of sector that
Oh.
in general that findings and I'm not quite sure if I should use?
Sure. Oh, I'm not a secateurs expert because I just use these Falcos because I get them free from work. So. And I'm a bit naughty because you're meant to write your name down when you're like, I've got number 66 and I might have had 33 and 22. I don't know. I've lost heaps of them. So you meant to put your name down and no one knows what I have. So it's quite good. But yeah, I like these, the Falcos. So do you sell these ones? You do? Cool. Fuel. Yeah, Falco. They're maybe $60 or something like that. So, but I give mine a really hard time. I cut through lots of things I shouldn't. Wire and stuff, and then get someone at work to sort them out for me. I find them they're clearly really resilient. But I wouldn't recommend trying to get through in New Zealand security checks with them. That didn't go very well one day. Yeah, so that would be my recommendation. Yeah. Cool. Okay, oh, thanks very much. Cool. Okay. Do you want to come up? I'll just grab my water and take this microphone off. Of anything. Yeah.
Do you know what you're doing? Should we put instructions in?
Yeah.